So before we get into things, a big thanks to Nacon for providing review code for this game. Racing games are a dime a dozen on the Switch. You can go and open the eShop right now and find almost 180 of them. Most of these games, however, fall under the arcadey, comical style of racing, where realism is tossed out the window in favor of silly physics, ludicrous speed, and weaponry. To buck that trend, out comes this game called TT Isle of Man, Ride on the Edge 2, a title that aims to bring realism into the genre with motorcycles instead of standard cars. But before we get into the game itself, here is a brief history lesson. The Isle of Man Tourist Trophy, usually shortened to just Tourist Trophy, is a real-life racing event held on the titular Isle of Man, located between Great Britain and Ireland. This event is the basis for what have been two games so far under the Isle of Man name, the first of which released in 2018, and the second releasing in early 2020 for Steam, later ported to consoles like the Switch. You're not missing out significantly by skipping the first game, really, since these are simulation races that don't have any sort of narrative, technically. In any case, feel free to pick up this entry over the first one if you're remotely interested. Tourist Trophy 2, as I'll be shortening it to in this review, is a simulation game that leans towards realism, so think the likes of Gran Turismo. This is immediately evident with the realistic imagery, locales, and driver names thrown your way as you navigate your way through the menus. And on that note, let's quickly dive into the settings, since that's one of the more evident early examples of how serious the game aims to be. For a console port, there is a surprisingly high amount of options for modifying the individual button prompts. Besides standard remapping, you can adjust sensitivity of those same inputs and even dead zones of all things. And these options carry over to pretty much every button. It's likely that most players won't find themselves fussing over these settings too much, but if you get highly invested into the game, then fine-tuning your experience is something you're able and effectively encouraged to do. More on that later. Jumping into the tutorial, you'll notice right away that the mechanics to Tourist Trophy 2 are involved, even though the first few minutes don't make it seem so. Without any changes to the button mapping, your standard acceleration and braking controls are handled by the shoulder buttons, steering goes to the left analog stick, and there's a camera view changer accessed with the left and right directional pad buttons. The main trick to racing in Tourist Trophy 2 is striking a balance between speed and handling by accelerating and braking at the appropriate time, which is something you'll be constantly guided by with these arrows on the ground, which flash red when you're going too fast and are liable to crash. And chances are you'll be crashing a fair bit even as you become acclimated with the mechanics. Midway through the tutorial, the realism bit of Tourist Trophy 2 kicks in as your controls are switched to the Pro mode. With this arrangement, you're expected to be constantly shifting gears upwards or downwards to adjust speed and leaning forward and backward with the left analog stick to prevent any unwelcome wheelies. You can tell from the footage that Pro mode was definitely not meshing with me all that well, so the rest of this review will be from the perspective of the amateur control style. This is another thing you can customize extensively from the options menu, if you so choose. After you're done with the tutorial, you're able to do whatever you want, be it engage in single races, the career mode, or a free roaming mode to practice your driving skills. I would highly suggest entering the latter, since the tutorial definitely did not provide enough time to fully grasp the driving. Much like other racing sims of its ilk, Tourist Trophy 2 will offer you a selection of real-life drivers and vehicles to race with different categories, namely classic, supersport, and superbike motorcycles. Each motorcycle has differently tuned stats which will affect your experience, so pick whatever suits you. Free roaming loads you into a large open world without opponents or guiding lines to affect you. The absence of both gives you a lot of room to breathe when it comes to practicing, and the roads are much more open than what the tutorial offered. So let's take this time to talk about the driving mechanics in general, and why they can potentially be a mixed bag for a lot of people. In its aim to be a realistic motorcycle simulator, the driving ends up feeling like something you'll either really get into or be struggling against the whole time. Motorcycle aficionados will likely fall under the former, and more casual folk are liable to fall under the latter. It's not that the driving is necessarily bad per se, but from the very beginning it can be unforgiving to watch as you crash repeatedly from trying to brake on time but failing, turning a corner but skidding too hard, or steering just a fraction of a second too late and getting flung off-road because of it. Even collisions at lower speeds can mess with you when you might think otherwise. It's like blowing yourself up with a grenade or other explosive in a shooter. You're probably going to laugh it off the first 2 or 3 times since it's amusing, but do it enough times, especially when you're actively trying to not blow yourself up, and it becomes a problem. Going back to Tourist Trophy 2 specifically, there's something particularly frustrating about trying to make the tight turns the game will frequently throw at you. Not only because these are where you can end up crashing frequently, but also because the AI is pretty damn competent at them. Crashing is already painful since it can set you back by crucial seconds that an opponent can use to overtake your position significantly, so it adds an extra layer of frustration to any turning sections of whatever track you're on. Another aspect of the racing which can be suspect for some people is the length of these races. Yes, the real-world Tourist Trophy, much like most professional racing leagues, has long races. The problem is that translating those times into a video game results in racing that might be hard to swallow for some people. It's not uncommon to find races where you're asked to do more than 3 laps on a course that stretches anywhere between 7 to 30 miles for a single run. Ergo, this will frequently result in races that can stretch to 10 minutes at minimum. Don't be surprised if you manage to crack 20 after crashing your motorcycle a dozen times and regaining lost speed. Realistic? Yes, for sure. Enjoyable? Well, your mileage may vary. Now in fairness, you can acclimate to the controls with enough practice, and when that happens, the overall enjoyment level is bumped up significantly. For my first few hours with the game, I found it particularly frustrating to be crashing all the time after frequently misjudging the kind of turn I could make, or skidding off-road and being punished for it. After taking some time to just mess around and free roam, I did get a better grip on the mechanics. Not a perfect mastery of it, but enough that I could reliably place within the top 3 in a medium difficulty race. Moving onward to a related topic, these comments are exactly why I suggest hopping into shorter single races before tackling the main mode of Tourist Trophy 2, that being the career mode. A career thrusts you into the role of a self-insert professional driver racing to prove your worth across a year's worth of races in a season, contracting with a team, boosting your reputation, improving your motorcycles by buying parts, and even new motorcycles outright from a shop. It's very involved. And don't take that comment of a year too literally. Months are divided into only a handful of races, so while the road ahead is still plentiful, it's not excessively long as the time frame would suggest. The basic gist of career mode is not too far removed from regular racing, except there's more things to manage and you're in a competitive setting against the AI. So if you already had mixed feelings about the racing mechanics, you now have to contend with the fact that performing well is absolutely crucial to moving ahead in this racing life. Doing poorly and exiting out of races prematurely can cost you the support of your team and diminish your rewards from each race. Speaking of which, besides the set number of British pounds you get from winning a race, you may also be rewarded with perks at the end. Perks can be simply described as modifiers that change how the race or the race results will play out. For instance, there are modifiers that reduce the wear on your tires, or reduce the amount of time that pit stops take if you choose to use them. Perks are divided into 4 categories, and using them at the beginning of the match will cost you a set amount of perk points, and in select cases, pounds, which are refilled based on your performance in a race. Strategic use of perks is required throughout the career mode to get ahead, so consider your options carefully. Perks are also available from the career shop, where you'll find everything from the 4 categories available for purchase with pounds. And besides perks, you'll also find individual bikes, cosmetics, and bike parts for purchase. For those looking to fine-tune their motorcycles, this is where you'll go after racing and saving up some pounds. An important thing to note is that there's no microtransaction system to speak of. Everything in the shop is earned through repeated racing. Nothing more, nothing less. It's likely that you'll spend the bulk of your time in Tourist Trophy 2 playing career mode, considering there's not much else to the game beyond time attacks, free roaming, and multiplayer, separated into offline split screen and online play. It probably won't be much of a surprise to you that it could not access online play due to the pre-release nature of this review, so I can't comment on that. So if you consider the replay value of Tourist Trophy 2 to be career mode, free roaming, and multiplayer, it's decent. There's certainly an appeal to becoming the best in the world as a professional motorcycle racer, and learning the mechanics of mostly realistic motorcycle usage can be fairly enjoyable as well. Let's move on to technical aspects. Tourist Trophy 2 is one of those big games condensed heavily to run on the Switch, akin to the likes of Doom, Witcher 3, and Warframe. As a result, it's fairly obvious that the visuals and performance have taken a hit in the transition from PC to Switch. Tourist Trophy 2 is locked to 30 FPS by default, and makes some fairly obvious graphical downgrades in the environment which don't take much looking around to notice. Pop-in from grass and scenery is common, and the environments in general are really lacking in terms of quality. All you need to do is look at any overhead clouds for the clearest example. That being said, the game is relatively stable otherwise, without any crashes or major performance hiccups to speak of. Sometimes the frame rate might dip slightly when the visuals are crowded, but it's nothing too severe. What can be severe, on the other hand, are those load times. I understand that the scope of the world and the lower horsepower of a Nintendo Switch means loading was going to be lengthy as is, but don't be shocked to find out that loading into any race will consistently be a minute-long wait otherwise. So in the end, can Tourist Trophy 2 be recommended? This is honestly a case where the appeal is specific enough that as a general recommendation, it's difficult. The steep learning curve and rather long races might hurt the value for casual onlookers, but if you're willing to put in the effort, Tourist Trophy 2 can be a fairly enjoyable experience after you've mastered the driving. The fact that Tourist Trophy 2 costs $60, or your regional equivalent, only amplifies the fact that it can be a tough sell if you're only rocking enough cash for one purchase. On the other hand, it's a perfectly functional and in some respects fairly enjoyable game in a vacuum, and motorcycle aficionados will be right at home with the simulation aspects. Hit the brakes and think before you buy, lest you crash. And to all of our viewers, tell us what you think of the game in the comments if you download it. A special thanks to our patrons who help keep us active, especially in these trying times. If you want to see more content like this, please like the video and subscribe for more to support us. I am Liquid12A, and as always, remember to return to the source.